Hey everyone, it's me Bailey and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be my top books of 2024. Every book that I gave 5 stars in the year of 2024. Now, I will say that on the day that I'm filming this, it is currently December 21st. So there are still 10 days left in the month. So there is still potential for me to find some more favorites of the year. Like, I'm not counting the next 10 days out. Like, I definitely am not finished reading for this year, but I wanted to go ahead and get this video out for you guys so that way I can let you guys know some of my favorite books of 2024. I will also be talking about some honorable mentions as well. I only had one reread in the year that I gave 5 stars, so I won't be talking about that book just because it was A Court of Thorns and Roses, and you guys don't need to hear me talk about that book because everyone and their mother has been talking about that book, so I'm not going to be talking about it when I read it 4 times in the last 6 years. So we're just gonna get that out of the way. But we are gonna start with my honorable mentions. I'm going to do them mostly in the order that I read them. They're not ranked anyway, like I'll just be starting with the order that I read them, but I will say that the last book that I'm going to talk about is probably my favorite of the year, so take from that what you will. But we're going to go ahead and get into the honorable mentions. We do have 4 honorable mentions, and the first one is Lost and Lassoed by Lassoed. This is the 3rd book in the Rebel Blue Ranch series, and I really enjoyed this book. I love Lassoed's writing. I have such a good time reading her books. They're so quick, they're so fast-paced, and they're just so easy to read, and I really enjoyed my time reading this book, and I definitely recommend this series if you have not read it. The next honorable mention, we have Fantasma by Kaylee Smith, and this book was so fun. It is like an adult Caraval where we're following Ophelia, and she is a necromancer, and she ends up meeting Blackwell, who is a phantom, and this book was just so fun. I feel like it was giving all of the atmospheric vibes. It was great when I read it in October. It was like perfect for the season, and I had just such a good time reading this, so I definitely recommend this book if you have not picked it up yet. Next, we have Blood and Steel by Helen Shearer, and honestly, the whole Legends of Thesmar series, I absolutely loved this series. When I read it this year, I absolutely devoured this series. Probably one of my favorite series that I've read this year, but none of the books were 5 stars, but I feel like the series is a 5-star series, which is why it's on this honorable mention list. I gave every book a 4-star in the series, but I just had such a good time reading this book in this series that I cannot help but recommend it enough, and I cannot shut up about it. So I'm super excited that I read this, and there is a spin-off series coming in 2025, and I cannot wait to read that. So if you have not read this book or this series, I definitely recommend picking this book up, especially if you are a fan of romantasy. Also, I'm sure you guys can hear Navy going to absolute town on his bone, but that is the only way that he will let me film without bothering me and trying to like hug on me. So please excuse the chewing in the background, especially considering he's like literally right under the camera, so I'm sure it's probably loud, so sorry about that. Our last honorable mention is When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. Now, I really enjoyed this book when I read it, but now that it has been some months since I read it, I literally cannot even tell you what this book is about. I literally do not remember it, but I remember my enjoyment being really high. I remember thinking that this was going to be one of my favorite books of the year, and it ended up just falling a little bit short for me there at the end. Plus, this book is so thick. It is actually insane how thick this book is, especially for it to be the first book in a series. But I do remember just really enjoying the world and how whimsical it is, and then there are dragons in this, so I thought that was a fun touch as well. So I really enjoyed this. Plus, I love this cover. I think it's absolutely so pretty. But yeah, honestly can't tell you what it's about, but I do know that I really enjoyed it when I did read it, and it's why it is an honorable mention and not on the list of 5 stars. Okay, so now getting into the books that I gave 5 stars this year. Like I said, this is in no particular order. This is just kind of in the order that I read them throughout the year, and the last one being probably my favorite of the year. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with the first one. So the first one is Say You Swear by Megan Brandy, and I read this book back in January and I absolutely loved this book. This is a romance book. It is a sports romance book, and this was so good. Like, it was giving Wattpad, but the storyline of this was so crazy and so just like unexpected, but so good, so heartbreaking, so just good. I don't even know like what else to say other than the fact that this was so good. This is my first 5 star of 2024, and I loved this book so much. I definitely want to reread it, and I know that this author came out with a second book after this one following our main girl Ariana's brother, so I'm definitely interested in reading that. But this was so good, and I definitely recommend this book if you have not read it. Next we have Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and this is the first book in the Letters of Enchantment series. In this book we are following Iris and Roman, and they both work at this printing press, and they are rivals, and this is a rivals to lovers story. This is a duology, and I really enjoyed this first book. I gave it 5 stars. It is YA, so I was a little bit hesitant about that, but I did end up reading it earlier this year and absolutely loved it. This book is kind of like a magical realism / fantasy book, and it's also kind of like historical as well, if I had to like classify it. But I really enjoyed this book in the series. I definitely liked this first book better than the second book, but would definitely recommend this duology if you have not read it. Next we have The Only One Left by Riley Sager, and this is definitely the biggest surprise for me this year. I have said this umpteen times on my channel, but I have a very love-hate relationship with Riley Sager's books. I have read 2 of his books. One of them I absolutely hated, gave it 1 star, and then this one I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 stars. It has made me come to the realization that I think that I really enjoy caretaker mystery thrillers, and this has that in it. Plus it has like a little bit of a hauntedness, like creepiness in it, which I really enjoyed as well. So I really liked this book, even though I was a little bit hesitant about reading a book from him, but I really enjoyed this one, and so happy that I picked it up, and would definitely recommend this book if you have not read it. Next we have There Are No Saints by Sophie Lark, and this is the first book in the Sinners duology, and I gave this first book 5 stars. I really enjoy Sophie Lark's books. I have given her a few 5 stars in the past, but this one really stuck out to me. This is a serial killer romance, and I feel like this one was so interesting, and I just had a good time reading this. I was not expecting to give this book 5 stars when I picked it up, but I did, and I really enjoyed it, and would definitely recommend it if you are into darker romance, and definitely recommend checking the trigger warnings if you are sensitive to certain topics. But I really enjoyed this book and would definitely recommend it if you have not read it. Next we have The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, and I missed the train on this book when it was popular. I ended up picking it up earlier this year during a 24-hour readathon, and absolutely loved this book, which I knew that I would. For some reason I was super intimidated by this book, but this book was absolutely phenomenal. It was 5 stars, of course, and if you are one of the people who have not read this book, yeah, I definitely recommend it, especially if you like YA books. But this book was just so hard-hitting and just so heartbreaking and so good, and I definitely recommend this book if you have not read it. Definitely check the trigger warnings as well in this one if you are a little bit sensitive to certain topics, but this one has been around for a while, so I feel like not very many people have not read this book, especially when the movie was coming out as well. But I read this year, absolutely loved it, and gave it 5 stars, and definitely would recommend this book if you have not picked it up. Next we have Swift and Saddled by Lassoed, and this is the second book in the Rebel Blue Ranch series. Obviously earlier I mentioned book 3, and this is book 2, and I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I feel like this book was right book, right time. I read this book when I needed to. I loved this story. It was such a good story. It was everything that I needed at the time when I read it, and so that is why I gave it 5 stars, mostly on the vibes. And I really enjoyed this book, and I cannot recommend this series enough if you have not picked it up. I know cowboy romance might not necessarily be for everyone, but this series is honestly just so good, and the books are so short, they're so quick, you can read them in one sitting, and I just absolutely love Lassoed's writing and would definitely recommend this book and this whole series if you have not read it yet. Next we have Play Along by Liz Tom Ford. This is the 4th book in the Windy City series, and I have to say this is probably like my 2nd favorite book of the year, like definitely in the top 3. I loved this book so much. This is a marriage of convenience story, and this follows Kennedy and Isaiah, and Isaiah is a professional baseball player and Kennedy is the doctor for the team. She's one of the physical therapists for the team, and Isaiah has had a crush on her forever. They end up getting married in Vegas one night when they're like drunk, and it was so good. It was literally so good. I have been thinking about this book ever since I read it, and I just cannot recommend this series enough. I know a lot of people don't like the first book in the series, but I personally really enjoyed Mile High. It is one of my favorites in the series, but I definitely recommend this series as a whole, and I love it. I'm so sad that the final book is coming out in 2025, but also at the same time I'm so excited because I cannot wait to read it. But if you have not picked up this series, I definitely recommend it. And yeah, I love this book. I love this book so much. Definitely one of my favorites of this year. Next we have Ready or Not by Cara Stone. This is a romance book that is following this girl named Eve, and she gets pregnant on a one-night stand, and her best friend's brother ends up kind of stepping up to help her out. She does end up having a pretty good relationship with the father of the baby as well, but this is a romance between her and her best friend's brother, and I really enjoyed this book. I thought that Eve was so relatable and funny, and I felt like she had a lot of reactions that I felt would be relatable. Now, I have never been pregnant or anything, so I don't know the feelings of what it's like to find out that you're pregnant or anything like that, but the way that Cara Stone wrote that, I felt like I was there with Eve when she was finding out that she was pregnant, and I just really enjoyed this book. I loved Shep, who was the love interest. I thought that he was just such a sweetie golden retriever boy, and he was so obsessed with Eve, and I just really enjoyed the relationship that they had, and I really enjoyed this book, so I ended up giving it 5 stars. Next we have The Perfect Marriage by Geneva Rose, and this is a mystery thriller book that took me by surprise. I ended up reading this on my Kindle and absolutely loved it when I read it. The twist at the end is what really got me. I feel like I was not expecting the ending, and so I had such a good time reading this. It was so unexpected for me, but I had such a good time. I literally was sitting at work. I had the audiobook as well, and I was sitting at work and I had a sticky note on my desk where I was like writing down my theories. Like, that is how into this book I was. But I really enjoyed this. I have not read anything else by this author, but I'm definitely interested to check out more of their work in the future. Next we have The Women by Kristen Hanna, and this is a historical fiction that is following Frankie, and she ends up going to be a nurse in the Vietnam War, and this book was so good. This was the first ever book that I read from Kristen Hanna, and I wasn't sure what to expect because I'm not generally someone who reads a lot of historical fiction, but just the way that Kristen Hanna wrote this book and the characters in this book and the scenes and just everything in this book, I loved it. I just cannot even get over the fact that I had never picked up a Kristen Hanna book before this one, but I really loved this book and definitely recommend this book if you have not read it. It was one of the Goodreads Choice Award winners for this year, and no surprise there because it was honestly just so good, and I definitely recommend this book if you have not picked it up. Next we have Daydream by Hannah Grace. This is the 3rd book in the Maple Hills Girls series, and this book got 5 stars because of Henry. I loved Henry so much. He is such a sweetie pie, and I just enjoyed reading about him and Hallie and their relationship, and this was just honestly so good. Like, I just had such a good time, and I definitely recommend this book if you have not read it already. Next, we have Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young, and again, this is probably one of the like top 5 of my favorites that I read this year, and this again is another accidental pregnancy book, but we are following Wynn and Beau, and they have a one-night stand, and Wynn calls up Beau and is like, hey, I'm pregnant, and Beau just steps up. I just loved how Beau stepped up for Wynn, and I loved how they were able to get to know each other during the time that Wynn was pregnant, and I just really enjoyed their relationship dynamic. Like, obviously it does have the accidental pregnancy trope in it, which I know is not a favorite of a lot of people, but I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the writing style. I just found that it was so easy to read, and I binged this in almost one sitting. I definitely read it in one day, but I really enjoyed this. It made Hannah Bonham Young a auto-buy author for me, and I have since bought some books from her backlist and pre-ordered her next book that's coming out, and I just really enjoyed this and would definitely recommend this book if you have not picked it up. And so the final book on this list, which I am definitely going to have to say is probably my favorite of this year, and that is going to be Quicksilver by Callie Hart. Now, I did just read this like last week, but I loved this book so much. Like, this book had me giggling, it had me kicking my feet, it had me screaming, it literally had me shook. I loved this book. I was not expecting to love this book as much as I did, but if I could give this book 10 stars, I would. Like, I absolutely loved this book and cannot recommend this book enough. So in this book, we are following Saris, and she is living in this poverty-stricken city in her like country that she lives in, and she ends up stealing a gauntlet from one of the men from the Queen's army, and her brother ends up getting her caught with the gauntlet, so she is taken to the Queen to be executed, where she then ends up accidentally reawakening the Quicksilver, and out comes Kingfisher, and then you would go from there, and it was so good. It was honestly so good. I cannot get over how good this book was. I absolutely loved it so much, and cannot stop screaming about this book since I finished it. I've literally been telling anyone who will listen to read this book. I just loved it that much, and I'm definitely recommending the audiobook as well because it is told in duet narration, which I feel like is probably my favorite way to listen to audiobooks, and it just did something for this story, and I loved this book. I immersive read it and just had the best time. I cannot wait for the next book to come out later in 2025, and I just loved it. I will probably be looking more into this author's backlist because of the way that I loved this book, so I'm super excited about that. But this is definitely probably my favorite book of 2024 that I read. And like I said, there is still 10 days left in 2024, so I am still planning to do some more reading in the next 10 days. So I'm not sure if these will be all the books that I end up giving 5 stars, but these are all of the books that I've given 5 stars, plus my honorable mentions up until this point in the year. I feel like I had such a good reading year this year. I will say that I didn't have as many 5-star reads as I had expected. I think I had 13 out of 161, which I think is around like 7%, which is not very high. So I'm hoping in the next year I definitely can read some more books and give some more books 5 stars. I'm super excited for 2025, and I cannot wait to read more books next year and hopefully find some new favorites. And with that being said, that is going to be all for today's video. If you read any of these books and gave them 5 stars, let me know down in the comments. Also, if you read any books that you gave 5 stars that I did not mention, let me know in the comments as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you've made it to this point in the video, leave the candy emoji And thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more content from me. I will have all of my social media linked in the description, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.